Hello and welcome to the Relationship Hub. Here on the Relationship Hub, we hear from real couples about their honest and authentic relationship stories. Now, in my view, there are not enough of these stories around, and so we seek to redress the balance. Today's real relationship story is that of Nicky and Sila Lee. Now, Nicky and Sila Lee are authors of the marriage course and the pre-marriage course, and they've been married for 44 years. They have 4 children and 9 grandchildren. Nicky and Sila, it is just wonderful to have you on the Relationship Hub. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, given that you've been married for 44 years, when we were sort of thinking about this interview today, we're thinking that's a lot of years to cover in one interview. So I think you actually suggested we look at the seasons, if you like, that your relationship has kind of progressed through. So that's going to be our focus as we talk about your relationship story today. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. I always start at the beginning, actually, because I think it's lovely to hear how people met and how it all began. So tell me about how you met and why you decided to get married.
Oh, gosh. Well, that really is a long time because it's like 49 years ago we met.
We were both teenagers. We met on Swansea docks and it was love at first sight.
And we ended up spending the next 2 weeks in next door holiday cottages in the southwest of Ireland. And really kind of, it just increased our sense of, whoa, I really want to be with this guy.
Although neither of us knew that the other one was interested. Took us 2 weeks to discover that.
But by the end of that, we had discovered that the feelings were mutual. So we actually started going out, even as teenagers. I was still at school. Nicky just left school.
And I think for us, the appeal of marriage was, first of all, both our parents had been married for a long time. Actually, both of our parents are married for longer than we have been now. So marriage held an appeal from that point of view, but also we wanted to be together. And so making those vows, making that commitment was something we really wanted to do. It was very exciting. It was 4.5 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, it's interesting you said about sort of love at first sight, and that almost sounds a bit like something from the movies, something that like a cliche. Can you explain what that felt like and I know this is a bit tricky in some ways, it's a long time ago, but how did you know it was love at first sight? Because I think that's almost like the question that people always want to know. How do you know?
Yeah, well, for me, I can honestly say it was just, I fancied him. The moment I saw him, it was on a very unromantic place, Swansea docks, waiting to catch a ferry. But he got out of this little green Mini and he'd just come back from being somewhere like, I think in France. And he was very brown, wearing a white shirt.
Had a lot of hair, full head of hair at that stage.
And I just went,
it was all going for me.
I fancy you. But it wasn't just that, because then I spent 2 weeks around his family and a whole gang of sort of friends and family. And I saw and watched the way he related not only with his family, but with friends and kind of, what more of his characters. So then it was built on a little bit more than just, I fancy you.
Yeah.
And similarly, Sila's family weren't there. She was just with friends staying in the same village. But then when I met her family, when we spent time together, we realized we had a lot in common. We enjoyed hanging out together. We enjoyed playing sport together. We had a lot of common interests. So that first, for me too, the physical attraction, then we started to develop a friendship really quite quickly.
We had lots in common, but discovered more and more we were quite different as characters and personalities. So you'll hear a bit more about that as well.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, isn't it? Because when you first connect with someone and you fall in love, you think everything is similar and we do everything the same. And isn't it all wonderful? And as you say, things begin to kind of reveal, don't they, as time goes by. So 4.5 years on, you chose to get married. And arguably, this will be the first season of your marriage together. How was this for you? And did you feel ready for marriage? Because I think it's one of those things, we can have values. Your parents had good marriages. This is something we want. Were you ready to be married?
We were ready in terms of making the commitment, but we weren't ready in terms of we hadn't seen our parents negotiating the early years of their marriage. And it took us some time we had no pre-marriage course to go to. So it took us some time to work out how we needed to adjust from independence to being married.
Oh, I had a lot to learn. I mean, my parents had a great marriage, but it was by no means perfect. And one of the things that I had not had a model of was how to resolve conflict, and when you get upset and hurt, how you resolve that. And so actually, the first year was pretty challenging, because if I got upset by something Nicky said or done or not done, I would just react like I knew and saw my parents reacting.
Or she'd go into a mood.
I
think I am allowed to say on film, like her father had for many years. And I had no idea what I'd done, why she was in the mood. And she didn't tell me. She thought it was better if I just figured it out for myself.
I'll tell you the lowest point in our first year was we were invited to go to a friend's 21st party. And we were going to kind of make a really special weekend of it. Well, something happened on the Friday afternoon, and I got so upset, and I went into this mood. I just was going silent. I was getting grumpy, and we had this long drive to do, and it didn't get any better. In fact, it got worse, and the whole thing just built and grew and built, and it was spoiling the whole weekend, which we'd been looking forward to. And it wasn't until literally about half an hour before her party on the Saturday night, I just couldn't keep it in any longer, and it all exploded out.
Yeah.
And that was the first time we realized, I have to learn how to handle this. And Nicky listened, apologized when he knew why I felt upset.
It was quite a revelation, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'd done.
And then I knew I had to say, I'm sorry. And sorry. You said sorry. I had to forgive him and actually say it out loud, which actually I found very difficult.
And that was the first time. I suppose we'd been married about a year by then, hadn't we? Something like that. We'd never said those words to each other, I'm sorry and I forgive you. See, it sounds so basic now. You may think, how on earth have we managed to stay married, even in that first year? But there was a lot of learning.
So we realised there was lots to learn.
And I think actually it's really good to hear that directly from you, because I think, you are involved in so many sort of marriage related courses, and it's something you've been passionate about. But the reality is you've gone through those things like everybody else. And that first year is something that it all starts off, and they call it the honeymoon period for a reason, because you're on this complete high, and then suddenly you're immersed into life with another person, having to deal with those challenges and learning how to communicate, learning actually to say what's going on and to discuss those things. But we do sometimes learn through our mistakes when it goes wrong. And it's just quite a good reminder in that first year for couples listening, be kind to yourselves and find a way through, because it isn't always easy. It's not always going to be shiny and lovely like the wedding was. So thank you for sharing that. So sort of a year or so then into your marriage, year and a half into your marriage, you're invited on a marriage weekend. Now I'm interested to know how that came about, and do you think it changed your relationship very much at that point?
Massively. I can say that absolutely as strongly as the sort of day after we came back. I mean, we literally, as Nicky said, had no pre-marriage preparation. And we then got to know this older couple who'd been married for about, I think, 25, 30 years. And they had a passion to support young married couples. And they invited about 5 of us as young, newly married couples to go for the weekend. And they were fantastic. And they just gave us such practical things about marriage. And honestly, I can honestly say that, even though they were quite simple, they so impacted and made a difference for us. I mean, the moment, we'd left that weekend.
And I remember one of the things they gave us was they just gave us 5 words on a bit of paper. And the words were God, work, children, church activities,
career.
Sorry, it must have 6 words. That was on
job,
one card,
career, yeah.
and then and marriage. And they said, put these in an order of priority. Well, we looked at the paper, we looked at each other. We hadn't got a clue. We never thought about that. But by the end of the weekend, we came away with this deep sense. It had to be our relationship with God first, then secondly our marriage. That had to be right up there. And we didn't have children at that stage, but children would come after that, then our work, and then finally church activities. And before that, church activities would probably have a much
friends and family. And
Yeah.
all that community and everything.
Yeah.
But putting marriage right up there as number 2 led to some very practical changes. And one was we decided we would have a date night each week. Now, until then, our diaries were filled with social engagement, either social or church activities. It was one or the other.
Yeah.
And we had no time. We just thought, well, we're married, we're together. We don't need quality time. But that weekend showed us how much we needed it. And that made a massive difference then and ever since.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point you've made there, because it is easy to take for granted that you're living with that other person. So therefore, of course, you're having time with them. You're always around them. But that's quite different to actually setting aside time with that other person. And I think most people relate to busy lives, whatever they're doing, whatever they're involved in. You know, life gets hectic. I know lockdown has slowed us all down quite a bit, and perhaps brought other pressures, but still setting aside time makes such good sense. And I know it's something you've carried on doing, isn't it, over the years?
Been one of the most important things I'd say over 44 years of marriage, being intentional about it.
And even in lockdown, actually, when we're, shut in all the time, we still discovered we needed this quality time. So we've made a real point of continuing to have a date night each week, which would be different and special from all the other evenings when we're just together.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's brilliant. I really love that. Now, another big change was about to happen. You've settled into a rhythm of business, of life at church, but you're setting aside time for each other. But then you moved somewhere, didn't you? Where did you move to? It wasn't just round the corner, was it?
No, it was literally to the other side of the world. And I practically had to look it up on an atlas to find out where it was. We moved to live in Japan for 3 years. And it was a really exciting adventure, actually. And I think because we got married young, and it was like we needed to have a bit of a change.
Yeah.
And I think because we were doing it together, I think for either of us, thinking of going to Japan on our own would have been a terrifying prospect. But actually going out on this adventure together, even though we didn't know another soul there, not a single person.
And couldn't speak the language, presumably.
No, couldn't speak a word. Couldn't read the signpost. First time we were living in a city called Nagoya. And then the first time we drove out of Nagoya, we suddenly realized we couldn't get back, and we couldn't read the signposts. And we couldn't speak Japanese.
Yeah.
It took us a long time to get home.
I think really probably what was amazing about it was that we were in a situation, a set of circumstances, a place where nobody knew us. And there were no expectations at all. And because we got married young, we were very still involved with family and community and everything back at home. So this was an opportunity for us to really establish our own patterns and our own life as a married couple. And that was actually looking back, we see that as a great time of opportunity to do that. And then we were much more anchored in who we were as a couple as a result, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And actually having to overcome challenges like working out where you are on the roads and getting, all those things you're doing together, they're new adventures that you are sharing for the first time. But if it wasn't enough that you couldn't read the road signs and you probably didn't understand what you're eating half the time, you decided that another new season was about to begin because you had your first child there, didn't you?
Yeah, both by accident. Quite a surprise, actually. In fact, about 5 days before we knew that Sila was pregnant, we'd had this discussion as to whether we should try to start having a family now or wait. And we decided definitely we should wait. It was too late. And it was only when Sila wanted to eat these extraordinary things, I thought something's up, something's wrong. Eventually we twigged.
And you discovered, So was that not incredibly frightening? I mean, obviously you thought, no, we're definitely going to wait. Turns out we're not going to definitely wait. And you're in another country. Starting a family is hard enough as it is. It's exciting, but it's challenging. But you're doing it in a country where you haven't got your family nearby. You don't speak the language. It sounds kind of bonkers, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I think looking back.
One real very practical reason is actually Japan at that time was the safest place to have a baby in the world. It had the lowest mortality rate in the world. So we couldn't have been in better hands in terms of that. Obviously, not having the support of family, I mean, I think that is a wonderful, wonderful part. And actually, my mum needs a gold medal because she had never travelled abroad before.
She hates flying.
Lives in Scotland, doesn't ever want to leave Scotland, my mum and dad. My dad wouldn't come. So my mum came on her own for a whole month. And I mean, I was
we needed her.
It was amazing. She was there for a month. And actually, I was talking to her yesterday. She's now 90. And it's as clear in her memory today as it was 90 years. Oh, no, whatever it was, 41 years ago. I mean, she just was talking about it again and saying about how we moved apartments, actually, between me going into hospital to have the baby and coming back. We moved into a new apartment.
Sila's mum unpacked all our boxes.
Oh, wow. So got you settled in.
For the next 2 years, we was always looking for where we thought Sila's mum would have put this particular couple of your cockles.
Having said that, it was actually also great when she left and went home.
Yeah.
And we had this, I mean, well, you talk about it, how it was like an adventure together. And
and this whole, I mean, you're right
together.
You say this new season of having a child was, and it's this sense of we're in this together, we're co-parents, we've produced this child together. So it was very much a part of the adventure of our marriage with new discoveries about what this meant. And actually not having other family around meant that we really needed to support each other. I needed to support Sila as a young mum. And I'm glad for what I learned in that season of seeking to do that. And likewise, Sila supporting me. So we were doing it together. And I think as a couple, we grew as a result.
Yeah, I really think that if we'd been back in this country, I might have had more time with family, but separated from Nicky. I am so grateful that we were in this together and we had to navigate and work out, you know, work and time together and how we managed going anywhere other than simply just being at home with our daughter and all of that. And that was amazing kind of start, I think, in parenting.
Yeah, it's like this sort of concentrated time together, which, as you say, I'm sure there were moments when, like you said, when your mother arrived, Sila, and it must have been like, yippee, she's here, you know, we've got some help and so on. But equally, doing that together really kind of brings out all the different aspects of your relationship together, shows you the things you want to work on and shows you the things you can celebrate all at once, I'm sure. So you've got 4 children. I mentioned that in the beginning. You've got 4 children. Now, you came back to the UK, I believe, to have your sort of second, third and fourth. Now, parenting, as we've said, yes, the start can be challenging for all sorts of reasons, but actually parenting children together can bring lots of pressures and difficulties for couples. How did you find that experience of bringing up 4 children together?
Well,
we don't want to minimize the pressures for a moment, even though, you know, we started 41 years ago when our daughter was born. We do know that having young children was sort of physically exhausting, and that was probably the time of the greatest pressure on us, and therefore pressure on our marriage as well.
Yeah.
And what we said about, you know, I hope we didn't say too glibly, just needing to support each other. We did need to do that, but it was amidst those very real pressures on our time, pressures on energy, and so on.
And I think I was full-time being a mum, and most of my day was spent with young kids, which is not only physically exhausting, but actually emotionally. A lot of the time I kept thinking, because I wanted to be doing quite a bit of work that Nicky was doing, and I kept thinking, I'm just missing out. And that's the challenge of parenting, that you think, well, let's just get through this and get on to the real stuff of life and whatever your passion, career, job, whatever is, or whatever. And actually, I think Nicky helped me to see that the job well, that we were doing together, but I was the majority of doing, was the most important job I could ever do in the world.
Yeah.
And having his emotional support, his affirming me in that job, and then the sort of emotional connection that we had to really struggle to keep was absolutely critical at that time.
Date nights became even more important at that stage and actually it was a time when we really didn't have very much money. I was earning very little, and I remember finding and most of our date nights were at home, children in bed and exhausted, but deciding we were going to light candles,
open a bottle of wine,
and we were going to talk. And oh my goodness, we are so glad that we did, because that's what kept the emotional connection between us at a time probably of the most pressure in our marriage. But I do also remember it was at that time there was a eat out for £5 token. You could cut out of the paper.
This tells you how long ago it was.
Yeah.
And you could get 2 courses in a really nice restaurant. I mean really nice, some of the best ones, for £5. And
amazing.
So we made the most of those.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't do it all the time, but every so often, and I can't tell you how special that made me feel. That, you know, we'd get the babysitter, and then he'd choose where we'd go.
You had to cut out a lot of tokens to get it as well.
Absolutely.
They didn't make it easy.
Yeah, so it was great.
I think it's really good that you've brought back that kind of idea of having the regular date time, because I think children are very demanding, and that's how they are, and they demand a lot from us. You've got 4 children in your home at that time, and it would be very easy just to keep focusing on them. And you mentioned, Nicky, as well, about the priorities and making sure you're putting your relationship with Sila first, and that is a priority. And I think actually by doing so, we end up being better parents to our children by prioritising each other. And as you've said, Sila, you know, I'm a mum too, and having those moments where you can step outside of that and think, this is about us right now, is so important. And I think it's just worth, I'm sort of hovering on this moment really, just because I think people can so easily neglect this. It feels frivolous, it feels indulgent, we're having time for us, the children need this, that and the other. Actually, no, you're doing the best for your children by doing that. So it's a really great kind of principle to live by. And hopefully, again, people listening will be thinking, if they're not doing this, start carving time out that's quality time for one another, whatever stage of life you're at and whatever you're doing. So thank you for sharing that part. Now, so I take my hat off to you because you've got 4 children. I've only got 2, and that's felt like, you know, it's been one of the greatest joys, but it can be difficult. And I've got teenagers now. That means you've roughly had, presumably, about 4 teenagers. There must have been 4 teenagers or thereabouts in your home all at once. Surely another phase, another season, I guess. How was that?
Brought me to my knees, Michaela. literally, because I think it's really interesting. I think we said that parenting younger children is exhausting. But it's exhausting physically, because you're always having to get them in the car seat, do, you know, whatever. But I think parenting teenagers is emotionally exhausting. And certainly in our parenting as a couple, I was more naturally kind of natural around parenting young children. Nicky much better at parenting teenagers, because what I came to realize was that actually you have to change your style of parenting when you start having teenagers around. And we read a book once that had the best line in it for me that I had not understood before, which was you move from being controller of younger children to being a consultant of teenagers.
Yeah.
And that I had not understood and hadn't done. And I think it was something I had to really swallow my pride and realize, no, I think I am still trying to control them. And I had to take my hands off, and I needed help from Nicky. I really needed his help and his guidance, saying, no, it's okay. This may feel scary for you, but you just take your hands off and do more listening, asking questions, you know, consulting when they ask, and so on. And that was a big challenge and a big learning curve for me.
Just for anybody who's listening, and possibly including yourself, Michaela.
I know, I'm taking note here.
We're not saying we removed all the boundaries all in one go.
Oh, no.
It was a gradual moving from the controller to the consultant. But I think I can honestly say that for me, each stage of parenting has been better than the last. And what I loved about it when they became teenagers was it was a time to, and I can remember distinctly sitting down with them to talk through a situation, usually as a result of a bad choice that they had made, and talking it through how they could make a better choice next time. That process of allowing our children to make their own choices and allowing them to make their own mistakes, particularly if they're not the most serious mistakes. That's why we still need boundaries, but allowing them actually is a vital part of parenting. And I don't think it's easy, but I think in doing it, we can build our relationship with them. But I think this is more about marriage than parenting. So
no, that's fine. It's all good stuff, and I'm taking it all on board. I mean, one of the other things I would like to ask actually is that I think sometimes people, come into marriage and they perhaps have different ideas about how to parent together, and again, that can be an area of conflict. Were there moments where, Sila, you thought it ought to be done this way. Nicky, you thought it ought to be done this way. How did you perhaps navigate that?
Definitely. So I am the one who was stricter in the parenting, and Nicky was the one that was more lenient. And when they were little, oh my goodness, we had a lot of times when we were polarized, because the trouble is, we tend to kind of go more towards our way of thinking, and we think
to compensate for
the other.
Yeah.
I mean, things like, for example, I was very strict when the kids were little, that, when they had tea time and that was their last meal for the day, that was when they needed to eat. And once they were upstairs and getting ready for bed and in bed, no more food. Well, Nicky would then arrive to say, bath and bedtime or whatever. And
they tell me they were
Dad,
hungry,
I'm
Michaela.
hungry.
My heart would go out to them. So I'd make a little picnic for them to have in bed.
There'd be a 5-course picnic going up the stairs, and I'd be going.
They were thrilled. Sila wasn't quite so happy with that. So we did have to work it out together.
Yeah, so by the time they got to teenagers, I realised we really needed to work together, and they needed to see us working together, because they otherwise would have got us wound around their little fingers.
They did some of the time, actually.
Yeah.
Play one off against the other.
Surely not, no. But I think it is important, that point, that actually you will come across moments where you don't both agree on things, and that, you might have an upset about that as a couple, and it is, again, not wanting to let that kind of distract from the importance of your relationship and making it work, and talking about those things, talking through that, rather than letting it overwhelm what's going on, because it is difficult. You come from different family traditions often, and people can be really adamant, no, this is how we do it and this is how it should be done. And actually, again, navigating those differences can be hard. But it's presumably, would you say, about keeping on communicating with each other? Is that a key part of that?
Oh, totally. And being prepared to change. Each of us being prepared to change. And what you said about, it's so often we will replicate what we have seen in our own growing up. And again, going back to my growing up, I just saw, lots of conflict between my parents when one of them thought one thing and the other thought the other. I never saw them do exactly what you just described, which is really communicate together about, okay, where do we compromise on this? What are we actually doing?
Yeah.
And we learned that was what we had to do, is set aside time to really talk at a meaningful level about these differences.
And I never saw my parent have any conflict at all. My father was a very quiet man. So I never saw them have conflict. And therefore, I never saw it about resolving conflict. And I realized, we're going to have to learn this. And one of the things I think I realized was better not to react in the moment, better to take a little bit of time to reflect and then come back to it and seek to reach an agreement. And particularly around parenting, we had to do that often.
Yeah. And actually, interesting how you've described that, because I think sometimes, for example, we can have stories of couples who've come from different cultural backgrounds, and so they're adjusting to that. But actually, we do have our own micro cultures. And, for example, having been part of a family where you haven't seen conflict, it therefore must partly, Nicky, have been a bit of a shock to the system. If then Sila's kind of wanting to have a bit of a, well, I'm not having that. That's no good. Or, I mean, did it panic you even in those earlier days?
If you talk about our marriage, I would think, yeah, we've had a lot of conflict through our marriage. Sila would think, no, we haven't. We've just had a normal amount. So
Yeah.
it does, our perspective very different. Yeah, and I did find it, particularly in the early days, when Sila would express what she felt very strongly and forcibly, if she felt differently to myself. I did find that really difficult. I wasn't used to it at all. And it was only just through learning that she doesn't necessarily mean what she's saying in the heat of the moment. She's not quite as cross with me as it sounds to my ears. So just to let it simmer down and then have a proper discussion was better.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing, I think, because I think we take it for granted that we just assume our other half will think the same way we do. Yeah. And actually part of navigating life together, the journey, the adventure is adjusting and recognising those differences, isn't it? And finding a way forward, which is what you talked about at the beginning, Sila, when you said we thought we had lots in common, actually found that we're quite different as well. And that's part of the joy of the adventure, I think, is fair to say. So let's fast forward, if I may. We've talked about parenting younger children, teenagers. I think another significant phase that would be recognised by anybody is that moment when your children leave home, that empty nest moment. And I suppose, I'm not at that place yet. I have one daughter who's at university. So I'm just at the very cusp of imagining life without children at home. And I'm wondering about how you prepared for that. Were you worried about what that would look like for your relationship? What went through your minds as that process began, and how did you get ready for it?
Oh, good question. I think actually we were sort of looking forward to it, to be honest. I know that's a kind of...
I hope none of our children are listening.
I know. They all know this. I think we felt that we had, this relationship that Nicky was talking about with them, that meant actually the whole point of parenting is this thing of them getting to that point when they are independent. That's you kind of releasing them. Yeah. And I think we were kind of ready for that, and I think they were ready.
Particularly by the time we got to number 4.
Yeah, we were well ready. So I think we got to that stage 15 years ago when our youngest son was just going off to university, and actually our oldest child, our daughter, was getting married, and and I think it was suddenly, wow, we're done with this parenting. Yeah. We're really done with it. We've done it. Now it's up to them. I think we were not afraid of the implications for our relationship, but we were not afraid for them either, because we and our relationship with them, because we knew they'd be coming back. We had such a model in our own family of being intentional about spending time, and so I think we weren't anxious about it. But it is a big gear shift.
And I think for us, it was a process of adjusting. And the process particularly was giving them space while still supporting them. And we still just have to keep a balance with each one of space and support.
But I think in terms of us as a couple, which is really Michaela's question, I think it opened new opportunities.
Yeah.
And it also coincided with our work, because we work together, being there were more and more opportunities to travel abroad, and that was much less complicated.
And we kept those to a minimum before, while our children were still at home.
So that meant we could do much more of that, but also just doing stuff together. I mean, at the age of 50, I decided it was time to take up learning golf. Because up until that point, I mean, I'm very sporty, and I'd played all sorts of different sports, and we'd play sport together, but never golf. And Nicky had played golf with our kids growing up, but I'd never been kind of involved. And suddenly they were all going, and I thought, right, now is my moment. So actually, my lovely sister-in-law gave me some golf lessons for my 50th birthday. So we then can play together. And that was a whole new thing that kind of we did together that we hadn't done before, and we really enjoy it.
Yeah, very good. So there wasn't, I mean, were there any times, would you say, at that point where you're thinking, golly, the children are gone, it is just us two, and you'd always had date night, and did it feel like one continual date night? Or obviously work was busy, but did you feel like you suddenly had a lot more time, or did you neglect date night almost because actually, you know, you don't have the children around? How did you kind of get that balance right?
Well, I think for us, we were really busy with our work, and therefore date night continued to be very important, not because of the children, but because of our work.
But I do think, again, in terms of us, we recognise, I mean, because of the intensity of our work at that time, we still really needed to communicate and connect at an emotional level, investing in each other and our relationship.
Yeah.
And I suppose the danger was, I mean, really, the danger was that we just poured ourselves into work and not having the children, you know, where they needed us to be around and do stuff. And I think we probably fell into that quite a bit. But we realised we'd set such a pattern in the past that actually suddenly we were like, no, we need to keep doing that and focusing on that. And so that's why we were quite intentional about making sure we were doing things together, new things.
And just reflecting then, how many years after you got married did that point happen? How long have you been married for at that point?
We've been married for 30 years.
So I just think I wanted to bring that out because I think the fact that you said, okay, there were sort of potential danger points, you had to keep being intentional, you had to keep on investing. And that's 30 years in. It's not ever that we arrive, is it, at that first moment of, oh, well, I've done a course or that's fine. It is that continual investment to make sure that those kind of danger points, if you like, as you described it, Sila, don't actually ebb into our relationships. And I think it's just important to make a point of saying, actually, keep investing, keep on keeping on in terms of looking after your relationship, no matter how long you've been married for. Now, I'm going to just move on a bit further in. I know when we discussed this interview previously, you mentioned retirement. Now, you're not retired yet. I don't know how far away retirement is, but I think it's another moment where couples reflect and think, again, how do we adjust to that? Now, you're not there yet, so you don't have a story of how you're going to adjust, but have you had thoughts about what that will look like for you? I mean, you may well be the sort of people that never really retire, I have a feeling, but what are your plans and thoughts for that phase of life?
Well, I think you're right. I think we will keep on doing what we're doing when we're not paid for it because we feel very passionate about the work. However, we've also, I think, recognised that we don't want to and we don't need to be working flat out until we drop down dead. Yeah. So we have very intentionally, actually, we've done two things in the last 3-4 years. One of them is moving house so that we are close to our daughter and son-in-law and 3 of our grandchildren, because we just thought there will come a time, there was a time when we were looking after her. There will come a time when she and I think our family are doing a bit more looking after us. And that's a lot simpler if we are close to her rather than as we were 60 miles away. But we've also just try to take time each day to do something more creative. And for me, that's doing carpentry. For Sila, it's painting and gardening and other things. And actually, it's been amazing. It's brought us more energy for the work that we are doing. So I think even in terms of preparing for retirement, it's brought benefits to us now.
And I think this year of lockdown, I mean, like for everybody, it's been such a surprise. I mean, we never imagined we would find ourselves in this situation. And again, I think it's caused us to understand each other better. And because of this thing of being really together 24/7, everything comes under a magnifying glass. And you process things in different ways as a couple. And we've each learned how the other one really needs to do particular things to regain energy, to have the space to, just be doing stuff that will give you that kind of sense of, yeah, I'm going forward.
And to give you one change over this last year, a year ago, at 2:00 in the afternoon, Sila said, we've really got to do this. Now she said, when you come back from doing a bit of carpentry, we'll have a look at it.
Yeah.
And it goes much better.
So different mindset on these things now. Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's really good to hear. Okay, so a different sort of question now, really. As authors of the, hugely successful marriage course and pre-marriage course, and married for 44 years, has there been a sense of pressure to live out a so-called perfect marriage? You're the experts in marriage. You've got to do it right. How has that been for you?
Let me tell you a story, Michaela, and I think it'll answer your question. On the one hand, we are completely realistic. There is no such thing as a perfect marriage. We will never have a perfect marriage, nor will anybody else. So we might as well live with that, that fact. We were doing a conference in Malaysia, and we were at KL airport, flying to somewhere else. And one of the big differences between Sila and me is Sila likes to get to an airport hours early. I like to get there.
How he says the hours.
Yes, I did know.
With just enough time to get through security and so on, just to get the flight. I don't like to get there earlier than I strictly need to. Well, we got to the airport and there was this very long snaking queue to get through security. And we had cut it a little bit fine, I do agree. And Sila in the queue for the security was telling me how it was absolutely ridiculous. We should have left hours earlier, and this is so stressful. We'd be much happier.
And I was telling him in a very passionate way.
Quite loudly. And anyway, as the queue snaked around, we came sort of level with another couple actually going the other way around the queue, who looked up at us and said, "Gosh, you're Nicky and Sila Lee, aren't you? We're doing the marriage course." And we thought, oh my goodness, they must have heard every word of our conversation. So it is true, we try to have our disagreements in slightly quieter tones, just in case somebody recognises it now. But it doesn't stop us having
That's a great story. And the reality is, life is what it is. Life throws things at us and we have to navigate those, and we can't predict everything, can we? As prepared as we can be, we just hope we then have the tools to deal with those changes, which I think is what you've demonstrated, very well in what you're doing. But I just thought I'd ask that question. I think it is one of those things, isn't it? There is this idea that there are people that have perfect marriages and perfect relationships, and it just simply isn't true. And often with things on social media, it all looks wonderful and brilliant, but there is that truth and reality of hardships and as well as the joys in a relationship, and it doesn't matter who we are, we're all going to deal with those things, aren't we, as we go through life. Okay, I've just got another question I just wanted to ask, really, which relates to some research that Marriage Foundation have done, and it was done a few years ago, and it was looking at one of the reasons that people give for divorce. And the people often feel it's the sort of acrimonious, big, angry, shouting couples, and it's all gone horribly wrong. And what was quite staggering from the research that Marriage Foundation did, it actually said that couples who were divorcing, they cited drifting apart as the biggest reason for that. And I've talked about this on other occasions as well, because I feel like it's this subtle danger that can seep into a relationship where people drift apart. How tragic is that? That it's just because they've drifted. But of course, it's over a long period of time. And I just wondered whether there's been any times where you've felt as though maybe you are just moving away a little bit, and what have you done to bring yourselves back in to that point so that you stay on track?
Like I just described about when we were very, very busy work-wise and when the kids were leaving home, I think there was a potential there for us to kind of just keep going, very hard work with what we, by that stage, were quite familiar with, knew needed to be done, all of that. But I think there are two words I would want to say have been absolutely vital for us all the way through our marriage. One is being intentional, and the other is investing.
Yeah.
And those two words, and actually putting them into practice, being intentional about particular things like having a date night every week. We had a family date night every week, taking holidays. I mean, lots of different things we were very intentional about. And then investing. Now, everybody knows investing is such a cool word, isn't it? I mean, when we're talking about money, it's, investing in the right place, or investing, I don't know, anywhere in anything is a good thing. And our relationship and investing in our relationship through all the things we've talked about, we never stop that. And I mean, now, through this lockdown year, we've continued to have to invest in each other. And that's often quite costly to other things, but it's so critical in terms of preventing this drift. And I think I remember some friends of ours brilliantly talking about, you're either in a marriage relationship, you're in one of three places. You're either in the middle, sort of going on parallel lines, or you're doing what you've just described, drifting apart, whether it's quick or sort of more gradual, or moving together. And I think to have your vision focused on, are we continuing to move together? And that means connecting emotionally, but it means in other ways as well, like taking up new things that you decide to do, recognizing where you need to change, all those sorts of things. So I think intentional and investing has been critical.
And I think one of the great privileges of the work that we've been doing with the marriage and pre-marriage courses is we have kept sort of researching and reading and learning from people. And Sila used the word earlier, the term emotional connection. And I think that's probably what we've learned most about. How do we stay emotionally connected? I think, in all honesty, we'd say that is the key to marriage, to a loving marriage, to a long marriage, to a close marriage. And we've learned lots from different experts in our own country, around us, and around the world about that. And because we're sort of putting it into the marriage course, pre-marriage course, we also, of course, are seeking to put it into our own marriage. So that's been a huge privilege. And I think just the thing of a couple, I remember one couple saying they decided that each year they were going to read a book on marriage. And I remember thinking, what a great plan. I don't know how long they'd been married, but I thought, what a great idea. There are masses of books on marriage that you can read, and you're bound to pick up something. Even if you don't agree with most of it, there'll be something you can pick up from it.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think there's some really, I like the fact, focusing on intentional investing, emotional connection as being so integral to marriage and making a relationship work. And I think those are some of the takeaways for me from hearing you today, as well as keeping up with date night, which, by the way, that's something that we do. And I'm inspired to make sure that stays on track. Just one last thing for anybody listening here today. If they're interested in doing the pre-marriage course or the marriage course, what should they do?
Well, if they're interested in running it for themselves and a few other couples, they should go to the website, themarriagecourse.org. If they just want to join a course, then they can always join our one at our church, htb.org/marriage. And they can do it online, wherever they are. But htb.org/marriage will direct them to the course that we're running online.
But there's both marriage and pre-marriage. So if somebody is exploring the idea of marriage, they don't have to be engaged, or they're engaged to be married, then the pre-marriage course is the one.
But really, I suppose our longing is that there will be more and more marriage courses running. And some of them will be tiny with 2 or 3 couples. Some will be much bigger all over the country. So anyone who's interested in running one, themarriagecourse.org contains the information they need.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Well, Nicky and Sila, thank you so much for sharing your story today, for telling me about the journey that you've been on, the journey that you continue to be on. I'm truly inspired, and I know that people watching will be inspired as well, and it will encourage them to strengthen their own personal relationships. So thank you for being on the Relationship Hub. Great to have you.
Thanks,
Great to be with you, Michaela. Thank
You're
you.
so welcome. And thank you so much for listening to the Relationship Hub today. I do hope that you have really been inspired by it. Please do like this video. Please subscribe to the channel, share the Relationship Hub with your friends and family, and do join us again for another Relationship Hub. Thank you.